Films I own but haven't watched yet. John Carpenter's The Fog. Antonio Bay, California has turned 100 years old and getting ready to celebrate its centennial year. But as the residents of the small, quaint harbour town begin to prepare for the festivities, a mysterious cloud of fog appears upon the shore and begins to make its way across the town, leaving a trail of horrifying slaughter. The Fog is an incredibly atmospheric and effective ghost story that confirms John Carpenter as a master of terror. So I'm quite excited to watch this. I'm going to go put it on now and I'll let you know afterwards what I think. Thank you. Okay, so The Fog, just been watched. It comes from an era of films that I really love. The 70s. There's something about the 70s films for me. It started off really atmospheric. It's a slow, sort of a lazy start with the radio playing from the lighthouse, sort of easygoing jazz music, whilst there's eerie sounds, bells ringing and mirrors clanging, bottles rattling, and it slowly builds up and things, you know, electrical appliances are going on, clocks start smashing and things. It really puts me in mind of the opening sequence of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It almost sounds the same. It's a good build-up of atmosphere. The opening sequences are good. When the fog comes in on the boat, and as the fog clears you see the silhouettes of the pirates, and that's used well throughout the film. Actually, is quite effective, and I can imagine it being more eerie and frightening back then. There were some really good shots in it. Some of the mist shots worked really well. Sometimes the mist and the light was a bit clunky. The things that, like, you know, Spielberg and that were doing with ILM at the same sort of time. This was Spielberg on a budget, you know. But I did love the soundtrack, the musical score, and the music within the film, with all the sort of jazz playing from the radio station. And then you got John Carpenter's own score, similar to that of the Halloween score, sort of synthesized music, but it echoed the foghorn that sort of goes constantly throughout the last half of the film. You constantly hear that foghorn, and the music sort of weaves in and out of that, and I really enjoyed that. So there is a definite style with John Carpenter films, and it's a style that, you know, has earned itself a cult following. Also now it's often replicated, even now, in things like Stranger Things, have obviously been influenced. Going on to the cast, the characters of Finn. We see a cameo of the director John Carpenter in the church, cleaning up the church for the priest, Hal Holbrook. You've got Jamie Lee Curtis, who also obviously worked with John Carpenter in Halloween. She enters the town hitchhiking through, is picked up by Nick, the hero, and within seconds all the glass smashes and he's like, let's get out of here. Cuts to the next scene of them and they're in bed together. You know, they've just slept together. Only met her minutes before. You know, back in the 70s they didn't hold back, did they? You know, that sort of storyline wouldn't be plausible anymore, would it? John Carpenter, you know, he must have been thrilled to bits to have Jamie Lee Curtis again, but also to be able to get Jamie Lee Curtis's mum, the famous Janet Leigh, who plays Mrs. Williams in this, who's like the organiser of the town's centennial celebrations. So of course Janet Leigh is famous for Psycho, Marion Crane in Psycho, and we know that obviously, you know, that's a big influence on John Carpenter. Out of Halloween there's characters named after characters from Psycho. I love the fact that it's only an hour and a half long. I love the pace. But it's sort of got 2 or 3 storylines going on. You've got Nick and Elizabeth, Jamie Lee Curtis's character, sort of running around investigating, and Stevie Wayne up in the tower is sort of on the radio but orchestrating the rescue of the town and her son. Elizabeth and Nick are sort of following her directions as she's telling everyone where the mist is going next. So then you've got Janet Leigh's character, and they go to visit the priest, Hal Holbrook, Father Malone. He's like a poor man's Murray Hamilton. So they go to visit him in the church, and he's found this journal. This story is unfolding as Nick and Elizabeth are on the abandoned trawler investigating, and I love the way that it sort of switches from one story to the other. You know, all these stories happening side by side. It's a quick film, it's quick pace, and there's nothing better than a short film. And there's a reason I never really liked horror films when I was younger, and it wasn't because they were frightening. It was completely the opposite. It was because they were cheesy, and this film is about as cheesy as they come. And horrors always have a way of setting themselves up really well and then sort of fizzling out and becoming sort of silly in the end. I think that Close Encounters of the Third Kind was probably more frightening than this. I think Jaws was probably more frightening than this. What is the difference? Why would this have been made for an adult audience when it's not gratuitous? Nothing is more gratuitous than the Alex Kipner scene in Jaws. But, you know, I did quite enjoy watching this. As I said, it was alright, not my cup of tea. I'm glad I've watched it. It's been on my shelf for, I don't even know how long that's been on there. I can understand why people enjoy this sort of film. I like a horror that's a bit more psychological.